Good evening. We will be beginning with a short introduction to our group undertaking our UT Tyler Catapult competition. We are the FourHorsemen, that is including Putman, Nathaniel, Hammonds, Westin, Jonathan, McMullen, and myself, Miguel-Angel, Olalde. We are all classmates in our Mechanical Engineering 1301 class. We are one of the groups undertaking the UT Tyler Catapult competition. The goal of the challenge is to construct a catapult that throws a standard cornhole bag exactly 25 feet with constraints. The catapult has a size constraint of 3 feet in height and width and must weigh less than 50 pounds, while the only source of power the catapult can make use of is a 6-foot length of latex surgical tubing.
In order to make this end goal more attainable, we broke the project down into smaller goals. These goals were given deadlines to assure that the project proceeded smoothly towards competition day. First was running an experiment to determine the spring consistency value of the latex tubing. In other words, we needed to figure out how stretchy the tube is. Knowing this allows us to know how far the tube needs to stretch to generate the given amount of potential energy. Second was to design the catapult in SolidWorks 3D modeling software. Having a visual for our final project will help for prototyping. Next was constructing the catapult's prototype. During the construction, we determined that some of our design ideas were impractical or physically implemented, so slight design adjustments were made after testing the prototype. The last step was to construct a final project with improvements based on the discovered flaws of the prototype.
Once the challenge was defined, the group sat down to brainstorm ideas. With so many perspectives, this was both a bit difficult to manage, but it was also very productive. There was a lot of scribbling of ideas to try and convey the mental images to other teammates. In the end, we managed to come to a definite decision on the design principles our catapult would follow, even if these designs were amended slightly after construction and testing. The part we are most proud of is the ability to adjust how far the tubing is stretched in between shots.
Now I will speak more on the experiment and calculations, and how they affected our final product. The first experiment was perhaps the most interesting in terms of both procedure and results. The full details are covered in the lab report, but, to summarize, we hung a series of weights from the surgical tubing, measuring how much it stretched under various loads. The results were surprising. With greater load on the tubing, the stretch was not proportional. In fact, it was greater. The conclusion was that the tubing was being stretched beyond the elasticity point, and so had a non-constant K value. To factor this into the design of the catapult, we decided to fold the tubing in half to double the effective number of springs and decrease the distance the tubing would need to stretch to achieve a certain amount of power. From there, we used projectile motion equations to calculate the force needed to throw the projectile exactly 25 feet. Knowing the approximate K value at different displacements of the tubing, we then calculated exactly how far the tubing needed to stretch to hit the target. This allowed us to determine a method for securing and stretching the tubing. In the end, a crank winch was used to incrementally tighten the tubing to a specified level of tightness.
Now, with the mathematical and scientific details laid out, we'd like to touch on qualitative aspects of the challenge. The idea of the challenge is fairly straightforward in concept, though the constraints provide the real difficulty of the challenge, such as size, weight, and the propulsion method. Additionally, one lesser acknowledged aspect of the project is working with the team. Our team thankfully gets along very well despite having very little interaction prior to the project. Overall, the project was incredibly fun and allowed us to get to know our classmates and challenge ourselves to complete the task.